In the aftermath of South Africa's 2024 general elections, a new political reality is taking shape, one where the rise of the Umkhonto we Sizwe Party, MKP, led by former President Jacob Zuma, is forcing a national reckoning on power dynamics, identity politics, and ideological realignment. While many see MKP as a dominant new force in the country's shifting electoral landscape, there's a growing argument that it is not a replacement for the economic freedom fighters, EFF. Rather, it is carving out a distinct political path, built on charismatic appeal, traditionalist rhetoric, and regional loyalties that may win over what some critics label as tribalists, but lacks the revolutionary ideological backbone that fuels the EFF space. This divergence between MKP and the EFF is not just theoretical, it's playing out in real time, in provinces, townships, and among disillusioned voters across the country. The MK party has mobilized significant support in KwaZulu-Natal and pockets of Mpumalanga, Eastern Cape, and Gauteng, leaning heavily on the nostalgia surrounding Jacob Zuma's presidency and invoking Zulu cultural identity in a way that resonates emotionally. But while the party's rise has rattled the ANC and led to shifting political alliances in parliament, it has not filled the ideological vacuum for radical left-wing South Africans who still crave economic transformation, land reform, and socialist policies, areas where the EFF continues to hold symbolic and strategic ground. What's becoming clearer with each political development is that MKP's strength lies in populist mobilization rather than in offering a coherent policy framework. Zuma's fiery speeches at rallies, filled with traditional references and clever swipes at both the ANC and EFF, electrify crowds but leave observers wondering what kind of long-term policy vision the party holds. While the EFF talks about nationalizing banks and mines, MKP talks about betrayal, restoration, and indigenous values. It's powerful emotionally, but vague practically. That emotional power, however, should not be underestimated, especially in a nation where voters have been burned repeatedly by grand ideological promises that fail to materialize into real change. Many in the political commentary space are calling this the populist tribal moment in South African politics, a time when identity is being wielded as a political weapon just as much as policy. In that context, MKP is not trying to win over the EFF space, it's trying to win over the people who feel ignored by both the ANC and the EFF. People who want to be heard, seen, and respected in ways that align with their cultural identities. People who feel that Johannesburg-based politics is too removed from realities in places like Nkandla, Ulandi, or Nongoma. These are the voters MKP is speaking to, those who don't necessarily care for ideological consistency but want to feel that power is returning to their communities. Still, MKP's critics are vocal and growing louder. They argue that the party's focus on regionalism and ethnic nostalgia could deepen political divisions and even set back national unity. They warn that elevating identity above policy weakens democracy and makes it easier for political elites to manipulate public sentiment. Some have even gone so far as to suggest that MKP is a political cult centered around Jacob Zuma, rather than a real party with democratic values. And when you see how central Zuma's persona is to the party's message, it's hard not to ask, what happens to MKP when Zuma is no longer around to lead it? The EFF, on the other hand, continues to occupy a very specific ideological space in South African politics. Led by Julius Malema, the party has made it clear that its primary objective is to restructure the country's economic architecture. It has never hidden its intentions to challenge capitalism, white monopoly capital, and the existing property regime. It is confrontational, unapologetically radical, and laser-focused on economic justice. That sort of clarity has helped the EFF maintain its base, especially among the youth and urban poor who are disillusioned with both the ANC's legacy and MKP's rhetoric. What's also interesting is how the two parties view parliament and governance. The EFF sees parliament as a platform for disruption and ideological assertion. It uses every opportunity, from dress code to debate, to challenge the status quo. MKP, however, sees parliament as a battlefield for legitimacy, not transformation. Zuma himself has alluded to the fact that the party's goal is to correct historical wrongs and restore the dignity of the people, especially those he claims were betrayed by the ANC. But what that means in terms of land reform, health care, education, and jobs remains largely undefined. Despite these differences, both the EFF and MKP have found common ground in opposing the ANC, particularly President Cyril Ramaphosa. Yet their reasons for doing so are vastly different. The EFF criticizes Ramaphosa for being a puppet of capital and for failing to implement radical policies. MKP, meanwhile, accuses him of being a traitor to the liberation movement and for conspiring with white interests to oust Zuma. This overlapping opposition has created moments of strategic cooperation between the two, but no one is under the illusion that their end goals are the same. The reality is that MKP and the EFF are both addressing different psychological needs of South African voters. MKP appeals to emotion, history, and cultural pride. EFF appeals to anger, urgency, and structural change. The first is backwards-looking in a way that feels restorative. The second is forward-looking in a way that feels revolutionary. That's why, for all its rapid growth, MKP cannot truly replace the EFF. It is not an ideological home for the socialist, the radical student, or the worker dreaming of a national minimum wage and land redistribution. It is, however, a home for the disillusioned rural voter, the elder who still reveres Ubaba, the traditionalist who feels like modern politics has abandoned the past. As South Africa heads deeper into coalition politics, the presence of both these parties will complicate efforts to build stable governments at provincial and national levels. But it also signals a maturing democracy, where voter choice is no longer binary, where identity and ideology now compete in the open field of politics. What that means for 2026 and beyond remains to be seen. Will MKP evolve into a national force with detailed policies and a post-Zuma identity? Will the EFF broaden its reach to rural and culturally conservative voters without losing its radical edge? Or will both parties clash head-on in a struggle for the soul of the black electorate? One thing is certain, the terrain of South African politics has shifted, and there's no going back. As voters become more aware of their options and more vocal in their discontent, no party can afford to assume ownership of any voter bloc. MKP may win the hearts of those seeking cultural redemption, but without a cohesive ideology, it may find itself limited in reach. The EFF may continue to command the minds of the economically frustrated, but it, too, must adapt if it hopes to remain relevant in a changing political environment. So if you're watching this and trying to make sense of what all this means, whether you support MKP, EFF, or neither, what matters now is to stay informed. South Africa is entering an era where every vote counts, every voice matters, and every new alliance changes the game. And we'll be here, covering it all.